All right, guys, let's do a quick run through of the study guide. You got a test. You can either take it today or tomorrow. And yes, I know my hands are dirty. You can't do anything about that. All right, let's take a look at this first image. Here we have an image of external respiration. So this little alveoli right here, you have 700 million of these in your lungs. And then you have, tens of thousands of miles of capillaries in your lungs as well. So what's going on here? Well, this is a capillary, small blood vessel. Alveoli, little sac, so that's A. And then if you think about it in your lungs, we want to get oxygen into the blood, and CO2 is our waste product out. Internal respiration is the opposite of that. But for here, this would be O2 coming in and CO2 coming out. That's really not that difficult of a concept. Let's move on to the anatomy of the respiratory system. So E, you should see your word bank over here. E is the pharynx. Pharynx is just a common passageway for basically all things. So this entire region right here, that's all pharynx. Food, water, air, etc. is all going to be going down that. And really, this will be a word we talk about with the digestive unit next too as well. Okay, so underneath the pharynx, we have the larynx. Okay, so the larynx, that's your voice box. Definitely need to know that. And then underneath the larynx, we have this, our windpipe. And the word you need to know for that is trachea. So that's your trachea. And then going down further still, the trachea splits into left and right primary bronchi. So on the test, the only thing you have to remember is that this is your left side, so it's his right. So this is his right bronchi. Remember, if you're looking at the front of somebody, which you almost always are in anatomy, it's going to be the opposite. Same thing with the lungs. We have right lung, left lung. J is the diaphragm muscle. You should know that. If you don't know what the diaphragm muscle does by now, you have not been paying attention. And then the last two tricky ones here are G and D. Okay, here we have, looks like our rib cage right here, and then these little things between the ribs, and then here we have this bag-looking thing that surrounds the lungs. Well, here's the intercostals, and they're going to help us forceful exhale, forceful inhale. And here's the pleural membrane, pleural sac. Basically allows the lungs to move without friction. Okay, so those are things you'll need to know for the quiz. Let's move on. Cilia in our lungs. So there's little finger-like things that line, they line pretty much all of the tubes in our lungs, even the smaller ones down here. And what do? They basically grab mucus and they just move the mucus up and out of our lungs. So they basically help keep our lungs clean. They grab mucus, dirt, move it up and out. Muscles responsible for changing thoracic cavity volume. This is going to be diaphragm, and then you have internal and external intercostals. And I think we have a question that goes back, and we'll discuss each one of those individually. Functions of our sinuses. I already gave you the answer to that. Sound resonation makes our skull less weight. Blood vessel that takes blood from the lungs to the heart. This is back from the cardio unit. Pulmonary means lungs, so we know it's pul. And if you remember, veins flow towards the heart, so pulmonary veins. And you got a left and right pulmonary veins. Why must our lungs be made up of so many tiny sacs instead of being made of a pair of hollow balloons? Well, if our lungs were just a pair of hollow balloons, there wouldn't be enough surface area for us to live. Remember, one of the Bellwork questions, how much surface area do we have in the lungs? Basically, about at least half a tennis court in our lungs. The only way to get that in such a small area is to have 700 million alveoli, not just two large empty sacs. All right. This is the in-person copy, so some of these words won't be on your test, but let's look at internal, external respiration. So gas exchange between the blood and tissues. So this is your blood and the tissues of the body. So not the lungs, not pulmonary blood, lungs. So this has got to be internal because it's not connected to the outside in any way. So that would be B on my chart anyways. And then gas exchange between pulmonary blood and alveoli. Well, take a look at the alveoli. Those are just connected to the bronchioles, connected to the bronchioles, connected to the trachea, larynx, pharynx, and then out the mouth. So your alveoli are actually connected to the outside world. So this is Anything that's any exchange going on in the lungs is going to be external respiration. On mine it's E, and yours it might be a different letter, so be careful on that. Epiglottis. The epiglottis is a little flap of cartilage at the top of the larynx, and when you swallow, it just goes down and closes, covers the larynx so you don't get food and water, because you don't want to get food and water down your trachea, your windpipe. So what is its function? Basically covers larynx while swallowing. Where's its location? Top of the larynx. Trachea, what's its common name? Windpipe. Purpose of the cartilaginous rings? Well, if you think about it, to breathe in, we have to create a vacuum in our lungs. So they just keep the trachea from just collapsing when we breathe in. Diaphragm, where it's located? Bottom of the lungs, just over the liver. What happens to the chest cavity when it contracts? Well, when it moves down, it's going to increase our volume. So we have increased volume. What happens to the pressure when it contracts? Increased volume will lead to decreased pressure. And because the pressure is lower than the outside wheel, we will breathe in. So air will enter. What stimulates it to contract? You do not need to know this, but it's the phrenic nerve. That will not be on the test. Larynx, what's its common name? Voice box. Greater number of vibrations. You get a higher pitch, just like a guitar would. Pleural membrane. Parietal pleural, visceral pleural. Where are they located? They're located around the lungs and just inside the rib cage, and their function is extremely important. They're airtight, meaning air will not go through them, but also they reduce friction. Your lungs are constantly moving around your heart and your rib cage, and we don't want to. It's very delicate tissue, so it just reduces frictions so they can slide past each other without any problems. Alveoli, where are they located? That's a tough question to answer. They're basically at the end of all the bronchial tubes, the end of the bronchioles, but they're also just everywhere in your lungs where there's not a tube. How do we describe them? They kind of look like a bundle of grapes. Here's one, but if you can imagine like 20 of these together, look like a bundle of grapes. What surrounds them? Capillaries. Got to have something to diffuse into. All right, back page. Oxygen, carbon dioxide pass through walls by what process? Diffusion. That's easy. Where does internal occur? Internal respiration occurs between your blood and the tissues of all the cells of your body, and external occurs between your alveoli and the blood in the lungs, the capillaries in the lungs. Pneumothorax, collapsed lung. Hopefully you watched that video. So its common name is collapsed lung. What's it caused? Well, it can be caused by trauma. Obviously, if something punctures the pleural membrane or cuts into the lung, we're going to have a collapsed lung. But the main cause is air getting into the pleural space. Basically, if any air gets into kind of this space right here, either between the two pleural membranes or between the pleural membranes and the lungs, then we're going to have all this atmospheric pressure. You got 14.7 psi. It's going to be forcing its way in from either the outside, or it can force its way in from the inside if the lung tissue gets damaged itself. So that's what's causing it. And how is it treated? The best way to treat it is just to remove all that excess air in there and kind of let the lungs heal themselves. Respiratory disease. Name 3 diseases that are caused by smoking. Emphysema is going to be the big one. That's a huge one for smokers. COPD is going to be another one. Chronic. It's a chronic disease. Lung cancer. Name diseases in your notes that affect the alveoli sac. So ones that affect the alveoli sacs are like pneumonia, emphysema. And then, cystic fibrosis affects everything. And then what affects the bronchial tubes? That's going to be bronchitis. It's going to be the one that solely affects the bronchial tubes. So does asthma, though, because asthma affects the muscles in the bronchial tubes. All right, name 2 functions of the nasal cavity and its mucus. It helps with sound resignation. If you cover your nose, your voice sounds a little bit funny. And also, its mucus helps warm and moisten the air as we breathe in. It's really only helpful in the wintertime. Last one, put these steps in order. Okay. So what's the first thing that has to happen for us to breathe? The first thing is a muscle has to contract. So diaphragm movement's always going to be number one. And then that leads to increased volume. And simultaneously, the air pressure is decreasing. So this is step 2. And the last thing is air is going to respond to that pressure differential. Same exact thing for number 20, okay? Diaphragm's going to be, even if we're breathing in, diaphragm's got to move up instead of down. Chest cavity volume is going to decrease instead of increase, and the pressure is going to increase, okay? And that means we're going to have a higher pressure in our chest, which means air has to go to high-low, air will move out. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about that I didn't think I covered that well was internal versus external intercostals. The basic idea is that internal intercostals are going to pull the rib cage back and down, and that's going to be forced exhale. So if you have to cough or something like that, you'll use your internal intercostals, especially the ones on the back side of your body. And then external intercostals will lift your rib cage up and out. So that's going to be forced inhale. All right, guys, good luck on the test.